it's time for us to go to work. Welcome to the Give Us a Dirt podcast, powered by Hoopah Grading Company. My name is Brandon Lindsay, and I am your host. Today we have our first ever returning guest on the Give Us a Dirt podcast. Brian McManus took one for the team last year and agreed to be our very first guest. Not knowing what in the world he was getting into, Brian agreed to go along with our craziness and share his story on the air. Probably because he had very little expectation that it would be heard by anyone outside of our company. Little did we know that that first episode and his story would become the catalyst for something pretty awesome. The Give Us a Dirt podcast has become one of the fastest growing podcasts in the construction space, and we have been so humbled by the support we've received from this industry. On this podcast, we share the stories of those that have helped shape the industry, and we talk about the issues we're all facing with authenticity, transparency, and radical candor. Today, we bring back the OG, the original guest, the godfather of dirt, owner and president of HGC, Brian McManus. Brian, welcome back.
Well, thank you for that introduction there, Brandon. I'm glad to be back for round two.
I'm kind of hoping that godfather of dirt one sticks.
I hope not, but it did sound good coming from you. I hope it doesn't stick.
So this is going to be fun. We're not going to make you go through the introduction. We've done all that before. You know what we do here. You listen to podcasts, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to do this a little bit different. Brian has coined one of his trademark models for success is PPS, and everybody here at Hoopah Grading in leadership knows that, and that means plan, path, schedule. That's the model to success. You got to have a plan, you got to have a path, and you got to be able to schedule for achieving those goals. So you came in blind today. You have no idea what we're talking about.
There is no PPS in my brain. I can tell you that right now.
Well, let me give you a PPS because I know to always show up with one when I'm talking to you. So our plan today is we're going to fill in the gaps from your original episode. And then we're going to talk about how things have changed since you did that episode. Our path is we're going to do a quick recap of your last episode. We're going to complete the story because I found out there were gaps in the story when we told it last time. And we're going to talk about what's changed, and then we're going to wrap up with a little bit of state of the industry and what your thoughts are about the industry. Our schedule, we got 45 minutes, so we got to dig in. You ready?
Absolutely. Let's roll.
All right. Last time we talked about your background, how you became a part of Hoopah Grading, the growth that the company's experienced, and some of the things you've done to help the company set goals, achieve those goals, and you've done it by addressing the issues that were in front of us. But there were parts of that story that I missed. And granted, it was your first episode, but it was also my first episode. So I quickly found out that I was not a podcast host. I had some work to do at that point. I got a call from my uncle. And granted, my uncle is not in construction. Okay, he's in the insurance business, but he listened to your podcast. And he tells me, he said, I was blown away by Brian's podcast. He said I couldn't stop listening to it. He said, I wanted more. And I said, man, that's great. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. He said, but you left out a very important part. He said, you talked about how Brian joined the company and all the success that you've experienced, how you've grown the company and where you're at today and what's coming. He said, but how did Brian become the owner of Hoopah Grading Company? He said, I want to know, how does some guy come in at that level and become owner of the whole company? So we're going to talk about that a little bit today because that is a very good point that we left out. What positions were you in before you became owner of the company? Was there a transition there?
Well, one of our core values is we do what it takes. And that was a core value that was, Larry Hoopah always said it on the job sites, always said it in the office. And so from a standpoint of positions, we didn't have positions when I started, with Hoopah Grading, Larry, back in 2002.
There was no job title.
No, there was no job title. I mean, I think my business card might have had estimator / project manager on it because, that's what the outside world, needed to see. But, initially when I started, I mean, I was bidding work, estimating work, helping coordinate work. Then started helping manage work. I mean, all this happened in a matter of a few months. I mean, you went from doing a takeoff to pricing a job to the next thing you know, I mean, you're out there helping the guys do some layout work, a little bit of surveying, and then you may help them pull some string and, you know, check grade, and then next thing you know, you're somewhat managing the job and coordinating low boys and coordinating material and fuel trucks and grease trucks, and I mean, then meeting with customers and you know, and helping Roberta bill, you know, creating a, you know, billing form and things like that. So, you know, really, I guess, you know, when I started, I mean, it was a little bit of everything. We did what was required. You know, there was no position, there was no processes, you know, there was no procedures. You know, it was just, we're going to do what it takes to get it done, and that's what we did. So there really was, you know, there wasn't no position. But I mean, over time, you know, you went from being, you know, an admin. You know, you had to have your admin hat on. You had to have your procurement hat on. You had to have your leadership hat on, your estimator hat, your project manager hat, and your HR hat. I mean, because, you know, all that, there was no one else. I mean, it was myself and Larry, and we had some, you know, folks in the field that helped us as well. But, you know, anything and everything that needed to be done or at the level that we were at, you know, we had to figure out how to do it, whether we knew how to do it or not. I mean, that's just, at the end of the day, you know, there was no book, there was no guide. You know, it was just myself and Larry and several others. We would bounce things off of one another, and we would put guidance in place, and procedures in place, and next thing you know, we would follow them. And that's kind of how we built, you know, we're really, a lot of where we are today, I mean, was built upon that, you know. I mean, we didn't even have we had one computer, you know, at the time. You know, Roberta used it for billing, and, you know, a lot of stuff like proposals in some cases were still typed. You know, there was forms that was used, and this was in 2002. I mean, we were relatively technological, you know, as far as technology then. I mean, Word and things like that. I mean, it was there, but just in our industry, it wasn't at the size we were at. It wasn't used. It wasn't needed. But you know, we brought that to the table. Kind of you know, Larry used to say, new school, old school. You know, that's kind of how we, you know, got to where we're at. But no titles. I mean, there was no positions.
I think it's so fascinating, Brian, especially when you think about people that are joining the industry these days. It's all right. When do I have my evaluation? When do I sit down? When can I be promoted? When can I get that next job title? None of that was there when you came out. It was nothing more than, what does it take to get the job done? And you being willing to do that and jump in allowed you to learn all the different aspects of running a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, in today's world, it's, I mean, we talk about it with some of our executive leadership here, and we try to, you know, put emphasis on this, that a lot of the folks that come into this company today or in the industry won't see some of the things that we lived. I mean, they just won't, because it's, you know, it's laid out there. There's processes, there's procedures, the paths are already there. You know, a lot of the mistakes that we've learned along the way, you know, we've learned how to overcome that. You know, they might not feel that pain. And in some cases, it hurts them a little bit, I think. I mean, you know, I think my mistakes is probably what's made me who I am today. Because, I mean, boy, we sure made them and still make them, you know, every day. But, I mean, when you've got the processes in place, and just literally there is a group for everything we do. And within those groups, there's certain projects that each individual has to, you know, complete day in and day out. So you don't get to probably learn it the way we learned it back in the day,
right,
through trial and error. And nor did I learn it the way, say, Larry learned it. You know, he taught me. There was things that he had already put in place, you know, that we don't have to you know, his point, we never have to rehatch that. I've already done that, and it works. I've failed at it miserably, but it works this way. So how about we just stick to what works, and let's move forward.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Good. Let's talk about that. So you talk about learning. You talk about learning on the job, and you came into Hoopaw Grading Company with, I mean, you had an engineering degree. You graduated from University of South Carolina, so you came into the job with a certain degree of knowledge and skills, and even experience from a job that you had done prior to joining Larry. What did you quickly realize that you needed to have in order to get to that next level in your career? What was missing?
You know, Brandon, I've been asked that a lot, and I've always been the kind of person that, you know, I never really looked at next level. I just didn't. I was never one that needed a pat on the back. You know, I knew that if I put 100% in each day, that one day I would succeed. I had goals. I really wanted to be as good as I could be, and make a decent living such that I could have nice things and raise a family. That was my goal. When I got, especially being, coming from a textile family, with my mother and father, and knowing that, they gave us everything. We had everything we could ever want, but knowing that as I got older, it was tough on them. And when you look back, it's financially. I never really looked at it from a standpoint of, what's missing. I just worked hard and kept going after it, knowing that each time I could do it better and better and better, learning from my mistakes, but also every time we would do something, or I would do something, if we implemented a process, if I created a spreadsheet, I didn't do the same math calculation twice on a piece of paper. I created a spreadsheet for it. And next thing you know, you're building this book or resource library of everything you've done. And so now you've got something to reference. That was the one thing I learned in engineering school, is you don't need to know it all. You just know where to find it. Mm. And so that was the one thing that I feel like I did at the company, that, we adopted a lot of things that, we learned together, but we never, we tried to never do them twice. We didn't reinvent the wheel. I mean, you'll hear me today, well, did you go to the resource library? That, that design's there. We did that about 12 years ago. Just use it. It's there.
Right.
Instead of reinventing the wheel. But I never really thought that way.
And I guess where I was going with that is not so much what is missing as far as the next job or the next position, but were there moments where you said, hey, if I'm going to be able to do what I want to do and what I think the company needs me to do, I'm going to have to learn that. I don't have that piece of the puzzle.
There was a lot of that, and it really wasn't the work as much as it was probably the business piece. So the financing, how does financing work? How does leasing work? Capital lease versus finance lease, income statements, balance sheets, things like that, I was in school for 7 years and I never had a class on a balance sheet, never had a class on an income statement. What does EBITDA mean? Bonding capacity, commercial insurance, your hazard insurance, your pollution insurance, your auto, your work comp. I mean, none of that was ever touched on. What was the right amount of cash to have in the bank to know that you could, live. Forecasting, that was one thing that, out of everything that we did, it didn't really matter about the accounting as much as knowing that the work you had coming in, you forecasted the work you were going to complete, you knew the cost you were going to have, and then also you knew the revenue coming in, provided you were paid on time. That was probably one of the most, I did that very quickly in my career for the company, that really paid off for us in 2008, because we were already started forecasting, and then once 2008 hit, we kind of knew that, we don't have a problem today, but in 6 months we got a big issue. So that was something that we learned on our own. But I mean, the business side of it, Brandon, is probably there's no guide, and I think that holds true to anybody. Your business at home. Our education system. I mean, don't get me wrong. We learned a lot in school, but they're missing that piece. I mean, there ought to be that this is how you succeed in life, but not just succeed. This is what's required in life. You're going to have to pay bills. You're going to pay car insurance. You're going to pay house insurance. You're going to pay your taxes. What you make it and all you're going to bring home. I mean, just things like that. It's just the skills that, in my opinion, in my 7 years of education, there was not one class offered for that. If there was, I didn't take it.
Yet it was absolutely required for you to be able to help run a company. Mm-hmm. That was the piece that was the other side of the equation. So if you're listening out there and you aspire to be in a position where you're leading a company or you own your own company, you're going to have that piece, whether you learn it through experience or on the job training or you're going to class. That financial piece of it, learning how to run a business, learning how to operate a business, the internal framework and structure of the business. I mean, that's a whole nother side. It's not enough to just know how to build the job.
No, absolutely. And the other thing that you really don't learn a whole lot is what you learn from your parents is don't make excuses, because it doesn't matter what kind of excuse you got when you're running a business. I mean, you're responsible. Yeah. You have to take ownership of that. It has to get done, or you will close the doors. I mean, that's just as simple as that. I mean, you can't just say, well, that happened today. You got to figure out another way to do it.
Well, and there's a lot of pressure that comes with that nobody sees. That's the other side. That's the ugly side of ownership, is that you're never off, and there's a good bit of pressure that comes with that. Let me ask you this: was there a moment that you can remember, and maybe it wasn't just like a very clear moment, but was there a time where you could tell Larry was starting to open up to the idea of bringing you in and letting you have ownership and starting to work you into that position?
There was. I mean, the relationship Larry and I had, early on was like a father-son relationship. I mean, just to be honest with you, I mean, when I say that in a business mentorship role, I mean, Larry could articulate anything probably better than anybody I've ever met, still to this day. I mean, he could explain how the dirt was moved, just how we would put the riprap in. I mean, he would explain those leases and he would explain those notes. And I mean, so just sitting there, and a lot of this was, after work was over, we would meet up to go over the bid that was going out the next day. And then there would be hours of just talking. So, a lot went into that. And along with that, the first couple of years, I mean, we grew. I mean, we started growing from 12 to 30 to 50. And, we grew what I would consider exponentially, initially once I started. And once we started building the team, around us. And Larry was, and I was probably in his 50s at the time. And, and he said, look, I don't want to do this forever. I wanted some help, and you've come in now, and you've showed me more than just help. I mean, you've showed me that, you have the ability to potentially run this business. So he always had those conversations with me, and he always groomed me, along the way, to be able to handle those problems, and gave me full support. That was one thing that, even if I was wrong, he supported me in my efforts, and was always there to provide, good sound advice, on maybe what we, and he never looked at it. It was never I or you. It was we. What we should have done, Brian, was this in this situation, So he was a really good leader from that standpoint. But early on, I never forget, we were sitting in his office one night. We had the office off of Texland Boulevard. It was a 3-office complex. We were in there, and he when he approached me, about ownership. And this was probably about 3 years in. He said, look, I don't know what the future holds. He said, honestly, it's probably up to you, because I'm going to be out of here before you. He said, but I think we've got something going here. He said, but if I don't make this move, you'll be my competitor one day. He said, you may not realize that, but you have all the makings of being an excellent business owner. And being able to do what we do day in and day out. He said, so what I want to do is show that I'm committed to you. And so he put together a package, and it was a time package to where, I would be granted a certain percentage of ownership per year up to a certain point. And we put that in place, and that wasn't nothing. I didn't ask for that. I never asked for a pay raise. I never asked for a bonus. That was never my nature. I was always, hard work, and just get out there and get it done. And that's how it all fell, for me. And he and I together, I mean, so we planned, and, once that happened, and I will tell you, I felt good about that. Although that, it was kind of one of those things. I listened to the Herb Sargent thing, day one. It don't really mean a whole lot, but it means something, later on down the road. But I always felt, even prior to that I was part of this company. That the things that I was doing, I saw pride when we were out there in the field, and I didn't need that. And I even told Larry that night, the night we had that conversation, I said, you don't have to do this. I said, I don't need this to come in here and be the best I can be. And he said, no. He said, but I want you to take it. And he said, this is how we're going to move forward. He said, and once we hit this goal, then we'll figure out the next. He said, but at some point, we joked. He said, you're my retirement. At the end of the day,
he
said,
needed you.
He said, he needed me just as much as, I needed him. Because, the groundwork and the reputation was there. It was, between Larry and his dad, Dan, it was just, it made it really easy to do business as long as we did the right thing and got it done.
Right.
But that's kind of how it happened. It was, one night, probably about 9:00, and he said, that's what I want to do. And then we went to the attorney's office and wrote it up.
That's pretty impressive, and it's pretty cool that Larry saw that. And you mentioned a couple of things there that I wrote down. Number one, taking time to teach, and how important that is. If you're trying to develop somebody, or you're trying to build out a succession plan, or develop your next leader, you got to take time that you don't think you have to sit down and walk somebody through. This is how we just did this. This is why we did this. This is how it makes sense. And it sounds like Larry took time to do that with you, and that's really important. And then supporting you. I love what you said there about it was always we. It's never you. It was we, and he had your back. Whether you were right or wrong, he was going to support you. And I thought very cool qualities of a leader. So there were, obviously, when you guys sat down at 9 o'clock at night and laid out this ownership plan, Larry felt like you were ready. Did you feel like you were ready?
You know, I never felt like I wasn't ready. But you know, I never really looked at it from the standpoint of, you know, I'm gonna keep being me, you know, and I'm gonna keep working hard to get better. And so I think when I felt like I was, the test really was 2008 for me, you know, personally, because there was things that, you know, when it was in September of 2007, when, you know, it wasn't really '08, it was September of 2007 when somebody come in and turned the light switch off. And that was the reality of the economic time. I mean, it was a light switch. It wasn't no talk of it. It was just boom, and the lights were out. And, you know, we rode that thing out, you know, for a while. And but I realized then that, okay, this whole deal, like I mentioned earlier, the business, the financial statements, just knowing where we are at that time, because I wasn't part of that piece of the business at that point. You know, from 2002 to 2008, you know, we talked about it a lot, but I wasn't really, I didn't know enough about it because that was still his space. We were real good at splitting our roles. You know, we didn't double work things. We might talk about it, but to be efficient, you know, I ran my requirements and then he ran his. So I didn't know a whole lot about it. And then in '08, September was 7, and then in the beginning of '08, we really started kind of diving into that together and talking about where we were, how's cash flow, how we're going to make payroll, and things like that. Oh, goodness, this job needs a bond, but we didn't have bonding set up. And so we learned a lot together, really, real quick on how to navigate, you know, through all that stuff. And then as we graduated from '08, you know, we got into '09, which '09 was really, if you think about it, the toughest year because you were coming out of all of it. I mean, you really had to learn how to spend your money, but yet you had to also learn that you had to spend money to be able to make the money. You had to have the right amount of resources to get the jobs done because we had work to do. So that piece there was really where I started realizing that, man, I'm gonna have to do a little more reading, but more along the lines, spend time myself outside of just bidding the work and doing the work. I've got to focus on what all makes sense with all this, you know, the business aspect of it, because there was big decisions that had to be made, you know, equipment wise, insurance wise. We had to have a bond program because the majority of the work was municipal. We had done nothing but private work prior to then for the most part, so we didn't even have a bond program. And then we had to have a bond program to do some work. And so that was really where we wasn't really prepared for it, but we figured it out.
You're talking about trial by fire.
Oh, yeah.
You were in it.
Yep.
You were in it. So you and Larry, you survived the recession. You come through that. Things start improving. Things start ramping up. Over that period of time, you've gradually taken on more and more ownership of the company. Company's doing well, and I guess I'm assuming Larry says, "Hey, I'm at a point to where I want to start pulling back now."
It was. I mean, that's kind of how it, for the most part, how it went down. You know, the recession actually halted, you know, a lot of the ownership grants. I mean, because, and I did that. I just went to Larry and said, look, I said, why don't we suspend this for a while, because it was creating a tax burden on us. I mean, it was because it flows through as income to me. With someone, you got a salary up to pay the taxes. Well, then it was more than the value, so that cash was having to come out of the business. I'm like, we can't sustain that. You know, it doesn't make sense right now. And, you know, and he's like, no, let's keep going. And I said, no, let's suspend it. It's fine. We'll be all right. We'll get through this, and then we'll pick back up. And that's what we did. You know, when things picked back up, I think we suspended it up until about 2010, and then we picked back up, and we made it. I think we made the balance of it happen in 1 year. I mean, because we had the work, and, you know, we grew a good bit, was doing a good bit of mission critical data center work, and it was good work for the times, you know, and put us in a position where we were much better off than what we were when we even started, you know, the recession. And then after that, I mean, it was just kind of gradual, look, I want to do this. And, you got to the point where we carved out, a little bit more ownership. And then next thing you know, it was majority control. And, and then we bought him out. The company bought the shares, and then of course I redeemed the shares. So that's kind of how it happened. I mean, but it was over time. It was a good, solid plan, and it was one that he and I, we sat down, and we kind of did all this on it's the relationship that we had, and we took our CPA's information and we put it all on a piece of paper, and we always looked at it as 50-50. That's just kind of how we looked at everything. And we just split it down the middle and said, this is where we are. You good with this? He said, I'm good with it. I said, well, I'm good with it too. So that's what we're going to do.
Don't you wish all deals could be that way?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, it just makes it so much easier. And you said it was a good, solid plan, and it was a good, solid plan. But when I think about it, this plan, it went all the way back to the day he said, Brian, come join the team.
Yeah.
Larry was already thinking about the future of the company and his succession plan. Back then. That was part of the plan. And so I say that, and I think about how he crafted this thing, and you guys did this thing together, but Larry knew that this was an important piece, that he had to start early in order for this to look like what he wanted it to look like at the end of his career. Do you think about those things? Do you think about succession and what that looks like? Do you have a Brian McManus in the wings?
Well, unfortunately, I would say that we've got 700 of them right now. I mean, the thing about the business today is we've got all the groups, and I mean, this business today, there is no way in the world Brian McManus could step into this business and run it. I mean, I may look like I'm running it today, and I'm there doing the best I can to lead, but we've got a team of just outstanding people, and they're the reason that this business is what it is today. We may have, maybe went through some trial and error to kind of get it to where it is, myself and Larry and others. But the people that are here today are really making this thing happen. We do have young people in this company that has all the potential in the world to do what I do, to do what you do, Brandon, Grayson and Tim, and some of our other, senior leaders here, and we're grooming them. We're teaching them how to do the work, because I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Talking about a career path, and you attract people with a big company like this today, based on the positions that you have available, and then where you see it with folks, that the big piece behind all this is not so much just the work. I mean, that when you got a company of 700 people, and I go back to when we were 12 people, when I first started, you got to get the hearts of the team. And that's something that, nobody ever taught me. I didn't realize that at the time, that, if you don't get the hearts of the men and women that are out there working with you, then they sure ain't going to work for you.
Right.
And I didn't realize that, and I made mistakes, along my way. But the one thing it was tough on me. I mean, here I am. I was 25 years of age, stepping into a grading company with, operators in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and several superintendents, looking at me like, what's this guy know? And I always told them, I said, I don't know nothing. I mean, I'm here to learn from you. But, it didn't take but a little bit. They're like, well, he's here to help me, and I'm going to help him. And then next thing you know, I mean, that's kind of where the magic happens. It didn't really matter about what I knew. It was about being able to work with people. And I feel like I've always been able to do that to the best of my ability. I still need work every day, and I'm trying to figure that out. But, I mean, to me, that is the piece where, any young leader here at HGC right now, if you want to succeed in this company or in any company or your own company one day, if it isn't this company, you got to put people first. And if you don't do that, you won't make it. You just will not make it.
Brian, that might be one of the coolest things I've heard on the podcast, is when I ask you the question of, do you have anyone you're developing to take your place? The answer is, we got 700 of them. And I think that's so cool, because granted, not all 700 of them have what it takes to run a company, but they all have the opportunity. And you look back over your story, you didn't have the last name Hoopaw. You didn't have a business degree. You didn't have a lot of the things that you were going to need to be able to run a company of this size, but you did have the desire. You had the willingness to do whatever it takes. You had the grit, and you just jumped in and you were willing to learn. And so when you say that, everybody's got that opportunity. It's just how much are you going to put into it to be able to achieve it?
Absolutely.
What's one of the biggest things that has changed for you since becoming an owner of the company?
I mean, you do get a little bit of a, obviously I've been smart over the years. I mean, financially I'm better today than what I was 20 years ago, eating at Wendy's with coupons. I mean, just so that's been big, and, I've been smart, along the way. But, really I think the biggest thing is, and this may not be the case for a lot of owners. It definitely wasn't the case for me, but the freedom that you have to continue to work on the business versus in the business. It wasn't always like that. The previous story was I was ready to hang it up. I just, when we spoke with on the Build Whip podcast, that was kind of the pivotal moment for me. It's like, and Larry warned me of that. He was real good along the way as he started stepping back. He's like, be careful. He said, because he was always good at asking, are you okay? Are you okay? I'm going to worry about you. I mean, I know what you're going through, but you've multiplied it times 10, now times 20. Just don't lose that passion and that fun. And that was a big thing with him. And because I think he had lived that. He had lived that experience, where he had lost it and it wasn't as fun anymore. But that piece there was, once we turned the corner, today it's the freedom. And when I say freedom, that doesn't mean I don't come to work, and I don't want our teammates to realize that, but it's my ability to detach from the business, but look at the business on, okay, what are our next steps so that I can keep us moving forward, be a visionary, also be an integrator, so that there is livelihoods for all of us outside of today,
right?
Looking into the future. So that right there is probably the funnest part of it all, is the freedom, but you also miss it. There's days to where you're like, well, I wish I could go out there and run that job, but then it's like, well, Tony's out there running that job. Tony,
we just talked about that yesterday.
He don't want me on that job, know. So it's
you got to let them do it.
You got to let them do it, and you got to let them fail, and just like I did.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. You still talk to Larry.
Oh, yeah.
What's your relationship look like with Larry now?
I mean, Larry's a busy guy. He's always busy, and I'm busy. I mean, he lives, about 45, 50 minutes away, but relationship's great. I saw him, last Friday. He was coming up, had some tires he was swapping out on a vehicle that he's got, and we chit-chatted for a while, and Larry has always got his schedule packed. He didn't have a whole lot of time, and he said, I got to go. I got to pick up some fabric before 5. So, I mean, Larry still works every day, daylight to dark. He races, and talk about racing a lot. He likes to have fun. He was an inspiration to me from the standpoint of it was a man that worked hard and played hard. I'll never forget when I saw him at a racetrack one time. His tag, he'd come up in his car, and it had "I work for fun" on the back of it. And I was like, I love that slogan. But he's always busy doing things, but we got a great relationship, and I love the time when we haven't, when COVID hit, we didn't hunt as much together anymore, and I used to love to bird hunt with him and, shoot sporting clays. He's a lot better than me, but we spend time talking and things like that. But I do miss the nights, because we used to, we talk about a lot in all business. I mean, we could talk about dirt to midnight, in my mind, when we walked away from, bidding the job, I had built that job in my head.
In your head.
And so is he. And, and that's some of the things I've shared that with you about our, our pre-construction group. I wish, we're trying to teach them that and getting them thinking about, all right, what does this thing look like now on paper? What does it look like when I'm done? But what's the motions we're making along the way? That was and sometimes timing, I hate that sometimes they don't get to experience that the way I did. But we built many projects way before we started.
Oh, what a great relationship. And every once in a while, Larry will come in, and I'll see him walking around, and he's always so kind. He's always so proud. You know, that's one of the things that you can tell. He's proud of you. He's proud of the company. He's proud of this team. But he also comes in, his eyes get big because I don't know these people. You know, we've hired so many people.
Oh, yeah.
And but yet he'll walk around, he'll shake their hand, he'll talk to them and welcome them and just make sure that same thing. Are you having fun? Are you enjoying yourself? And glad you're part of the team. So I'm glad that you guys still are able to enjoy each other's friendship and talk to each other from time to time. I want to talk. Let's talk about this podcast. You got to be honest now. When I came to you and said, "Hey, the team wants to do a podcast," what was your first thought?
I thought you were crazy. And number one, I really didn't even know what a podcast was. I had heard of them. And then I realized, okay, well, there's something on my phone right there that says podcast. I mean, I wasn't that crazy about it. I mean, of course, I didn't know where it was headed, you know. I mean, I didn't. But I knew anything that you touch was going to be great, and the team around you would be great. So I said, let's roll with it.
Well, not only did we ask you if we could do the podcast, we asked you to be the first guest on it, and you did it. And so now, looking back on it, we've been doing this thing for, I don't know, a year or so. Tell our listeners kind of what you've experienced from it, because, I mean, you've built partnerships out of this thing. You've met some people, you've had some great conversations and been able to do some things from it. What, looking back on it, kind of what do you feel like it's done?
Well, I think, you know, for me, number one, personally, I mean, you never stop learning. I mean, you know, I've picked up more stuff from the men and women that you've had on this podcast to add to my book of, okay, well, maybe I need to be doing what they're doing or adjust it a little bit where it fits our needs. I mean, you learn.
What were some of your favorite guests?
So, you know, Herb Sargent's was great.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Mike Tropsha, I really enjoyed his, you know, the Jacksons. I mean, really all of them. I mean, you know, to me, there's really not a favorite, you know, they were all good in their own unique way. But the other piece behind it is here you are, you've got lots of successful individuals that are in leadership roles, owning companies, that really make an impact for their communities, as far as the workforce. But the one driving thing, I think, with all of them, and this is what's really unique, I think, is every one of the folks that have come in here and been on this thing, they recognize one thing, and they recognize that it's all about the people. And you still see in our industry that that's not necessarily the case, you know, across the way. And I think it's changing. It's going to have to change. But I think that was the one theme that I got out of all of them. You know, the other thing is that I had no idea that, you know, we were going to be bringing people from Maine in. You know, I'm proud of it. You know, I'm a humble guy. You know me. I'm not one to brag. I kind of like to fly under the radar. You know that. You kind of drug me back to the first one and back into the second one. But, you know, you're very proud of the organization. You're proud of the, you know, that Hoopaw Grading can be, you know, somewhat of a, you know, a not so much an icon, but just one of the players in the industry that's trying to make a difference, you know, with our academy, you know, and we're willing to share, you know, everything that we've got. But you also realize how everybody else is willing to share too, you know, for the betterment of our industry, to help us get there.
Yeah. Not just share, but to work together. That's the part that I think we've really enjoyed seeing. You know, you mentioned that common thread that we've had through all the guests. I mean, we interview people here that have had success in the industry. You know, these are successful people, successful company. We're not interviewing a lot of companies that weren't successful in it, right? Mm-hmm. That have had a hard time. And when you find that common thread for successful companies is all the people that focused on the people, the ones that made people development, workforce development, and focusing on the people. Those are the ones that have achieved success. I mentioned we had Katie in here, and we were talking, and I said one of the things that I've seen that's been eye-opening for me is that of the companies, number one, we're not the only ones dealing with the things that we're dealing with. The issues that we have, the problems we have, we're not the only ones facing them. But number two, we're not the only ones trying to fix them either. And there's some companies and leaders out there that are doing some pretty cool things to address some of the problems we're facing as an industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if it hadn't been for this podcast, we number one, folks might not know us, but we wouldn't know them. And for those folks to reach out and talk about the same problems but say, hey, look, we've been working on this for 10 years. Check out what we've got. And then they look at what we've done. I mean, it's really cool. And so I do think that the construction industry, and I'm not going to say the construction industry, I think we've got to say the site work industry, the dirt world, as Aaron Witt puts it. I mean, it's a world, in my opinion, that's been left out. You've got the most expensive assets to purchase, but yet the people are looked at differently and led differently and trained differently all these years. And everything's been focused in another way. I mean, even college. I mean, you got construction management degree. Well, how about show people how to build it? You design it, but how about, again, show people how to build it? And it's just been missing. And I think we're getting traction. We're getting there. It's neat to see going to schools. And then I get, the thing that what gets me the most about the podcast is I'll get people that say, hey, I listen to your podcast, especially from, back home in Lancaster County. I had several people initially, who just call me up or text me. I'm not on social media, so they get to my wife, and then my wife would say, hey, so-and-so listened to your podcast. And I was like, well, I didn't even, I hadn't talked to so-and-so in 25, 30 years, so it was really cool that, and I think folks that, it wasn't that they were proud to hear from me. They were proud to hear someone that they know that's probably doing something to help people, with their education in the construction world and to create opportunities and things like that with an organization. So I thought that was real cool too, that, it's getting our name out there, that we are making a difference, and we are trying to put the best people in our machines, but also help the industry as well.
I'm just so glad you said yes. I'm so glad you came on, you shared your story. And I do laugh a little bit because I know how uncomfortable you were in the beginning. You've gotten a lot more comfortable with it lately. You're so much better behind the mic, in front of a camera, but I know you're still the same guy. You're still humble. That's not where you want to be. You even get asked to you got asked to be a keynote speaker for a major industry event. And so is that weird, getting those kind of opportunities?
It's very weird. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you've done really well at maybe helping me with that.
Well,
yeah,
it's a cool story to tell. So let's move on to the industry. Everybody's wanting to know what's going on out there right now. We hear things all over the industry. Is it getting ready to slow down? Are we in store for another recession? What are you hearing?
I mean, well, number one, I'm hearing everything everybody else is hearing too. I mean, I think if you watch the mainstream media, which I don't watch much of it anymore or listen to it anymore, it's all doom and gloom. And there may be doom and gloom in other parts of the country, but, I do think that the area we live in is a vibrant market. There seems to be a lot going on, but I can't help to look at what's going on, and it does not make me feel like '08 at all. But the fact that there's not enough labor to go around. I mean, we're doing good filling our seats, but yet others are not, and we still have our problems too. The materials market is terrible, and it's putting you in positions to where I feel like it strains relationships with your customers. We can't plan, because nobody can tell us when we're going to be able to get the material to go in the ground. Machines, I mean, we can get machines. I mean, our partners, that's one thing I can say about all of our, the suppliers that supply our machines, the assets that we do dig with, kind of got ahead of a lot of this, when they've warned us that you need to hold on to certain things a little bit longer. That's actually improved, but I think that was improved to what I would consider very professional relationships and communication to make that happen. But I mean, it's due a slowdown. I mean, you can't keep working and keep increasing cost, and you're not putting out for your customer. I mean, at some point, all this gets passed on. And if you're in the residential housing market, with the national guys or just individual private folks, I mean, the cost to build the developed land gets pushed to the home. And if the individual can't afford the home, then, you don't sell houses. And if you don't sell houses, you don't develop land. If you don't develop land, you don't sell land. Land prices have gone through the roof. And same on the commercial side. I mean, I do think the commercial side, from what you see, I mean, there is a potentially still a shortage. You know, sometimes on the commercial side, I don't think we ever got caught up from 2008. You know, when you had the big residential boom, that never really picked up then. So warehouse distribution, the way folks order things online now, you don't really go to stores. Retail is unheard of. Excuse me, I don't really see any retail stores going on. But to answer your question, I mean, you know, we see a pullback. I mean, we've had projects that were go, 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 go. And well, let's think about them a little bit. We're going to pause. Fuel, obviously, is typically a driver, but, you know, before fuel, materials is just way more than fuel ever can even think of on a budget, you know, at this point. I think I read this morning that the, you know, National Home Builders Association said that, you know, sales were down 12.5%. So that has got to hit at some point, and I think it's starting to hit now. Is this a bad thing? I mean, number one, we can't keep up with demand. You know, the pipe suppliers can't make enough pipe. In some cases, diesel, they can't make enough diesel. You know, there's shortages. We've seen that, you know, throughout the summer. And then there's not enough people to do the work, you know, and, you know, 10-month schedules are now 14 and 15. I mean, so they're just unheard of. And so it's hard. To me, that's not sustainable. I've never lived through this. You know, I've never lived through a pandemic, a COVID pandemic, and this huge demand. But I do know that, you know, you can't sustain inflation the way that we've seen it and continue to make ends meet and pay the bills and have money left over to invest in the business.
So a correction seems likely.
Seems likely.
And it's probably not a bad thing right now, given some of the challenges that we're facing.
I don't. I mean,
Brian, after you said it, and I agree with you, I don't think we're looking at anything like what we experienced back in 07, 08, 09. But given that the potential for economic challenges, what do you as a business owner, what do you start thinking about? What do you do to protect the company in those situations? Are there things you do differently, making sure that you're lined up with the right partners in this thing? I know that's critical.
Yeah, we learned that in 08, you know, who to be with, who not to be with. So we're with those that, you know, stood by us then. That's why we're very loyal to our trade partners. You do learn how to structure like your equipment assets, your equipment deals, you know, how you know, rent, lease, own. So we have levers to pull when the time comes. You know, we're forecasting to the T. I mean, so we kind of know what we got, know what we should yield out of it. So we know the timing of all that. We know when to drop, you know, to what we call pull the levers to be able to, you know, it's kind of like when COVID hit, you know, we said, you know, our goal, we're going to keep the ship afloat. And, you know, we exercised a lot of that then. A lot of things we learned in 08, you know, we learned to do that again. And so we had those levers to pull. Same with now. Cash, obviously, cash is huge. I mean, when it starts raining, most time those that are providing you the umbrellas might not want to use them or let you use them. So your cash is king. I mean, that's an easy business tip from anybody. But you need to get your cash. You need to collect your cash. You know, our business is a business that, you know, is one that this retainage thing. Number one, most people don't even net 10%, but yet they're holding 10% of your money. So you're kind of always in the rears on cost and things like that. Plus, you're paying taxes on that money as well through the federal and state government, but you hadn't even collected it. So, you know, the retainage thing, getting your jobs done, execute and get them done right so you can collect your retainage.
And that seems like it's going away. That retainage thing, I remember that's been there forever, but it seems like that's one of those things that people are starting to realize is not supposed to be.
They are, and honestly, as a construction company, you know, we want to partner with those that do realize that, because you cannot, you know, dampen the impact of what cash does to a company. They need their cash. And then a lot of these folks they don't pay in 30 days. They're 60, they're 90, you know, so you got 120 days on a job before you draw your first month's draw. Yeah. So you're behind. So they always have a little bit on you. I mean, I do think the retainage thing, if you're an owner or you're a general contractor, you need to revisit that. You know, again, we associate ourselves with, you know, folks that, you know, they're going to get the job done. And that's what our contracts are for. We ask some folks and they'll say, well, why do you hold retainage? To make sure you do your job. Well, have I ever left you hanging? Yeah. That's the kind of things. But we've got good partners now that are, obviously when they can, they're reducing the retainage. We've got some that don't hold it at all. And you work a lot more efficiently for folks like that too. And I think in a market like this, those are things to consider. But cash is king. You got to collect your cash. And the other thing that you got to do now, and this is like with us, I mean, we've bolted on this academy for training our people. And I hope that whatever happens in the industry or the whole state of the economy, that it doesn't dampen the impact of the gains that our industry has had with workplace training, education, and development. Because, a lot of times that's the programs in some cases go because people feel like they're not producing a product. And I can tell you with us, it's going to be the last thing that goes because it is everything in producing the top-notch service that we've got to serve our clients with. So I feel like that'll put us above where we need to be when things do pick back up and margins are good again. Because margins are not that great right now. I mean, they're just not. Inflation's eat them up, along the way for the past year and a half, 2 years.
I know there's a lot of people that are glad to hear you say that right now. And that's always been you. It's not just, here when things start to look a little uncertain, investing in the people was critical. It wasn't something we got to do when things were good. It was something that you did all the time. So cash is king. Identify the right clients and the right opportunities.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's just to kind of tie things up here and finish up. What do you think, outside of the economic uncertainty, what other challenges are we facing as an industry? Have they changed? Is it the people issue? What else have we got in front of us that we're going to be facing?
I just don't see no challenges if we do the right thing. Honestly, obviously you need a vibrant economy that's moving. And, when we've been very fortunate. I mean, since 2010, I mean, we've really gone 12 years of uninterruption. I mean, which is unheard of. I mean, Larry used to tell me his 10-year cycles, hold down the hatches, and that's held pretty true. I mean, and we had a little blip, I guess several years ago that we thought things were going to pull back. We didn't see it. We were in markets that didn't pull back with some of the diversification that we've done. But, as far as challenges, Brandon, I mean, the challenges are opportunities to do better. And so I think, as a business, you got to take all those challenges, all your problems, and fix them. And not only fix them, give your team the tools to prevent them from happening, but solve the next one and the next one. So I don't think there's no challenges. And now the material, but I take that back. The companies that don't do that, don't look at it that way, they're going to be challenges. And if we're buying from them, it's going to impact our business. So when there's the materials market, that if there is a correction, I hope they can get their house in order to be able to expand their operations and to be able to meet the demand, that's there. And again, focus on their people. Not saying they're not. I'm just saying that, typically when we need to expand and we need to do something within our organization to meet a need, when we focus on the people and not the iron or the tool that's needed to do it, we tend to achieve our goal.
Yeah.
That's kind of me. I don't think it's too bad.
That is you, and I love that approach to it. Brian, thank you again for coming back and doing round two. So we hit our plan, we hit our path. I think I botched the schedule because we ended up talking a little bit longer, but it was worth every minute of it. I hope that the takeaway from this, I hope someone hears your story, someone that may be just getting started at Hoopah Grading or another company in the industry, hears your story and is inspired that they can achieve all their hopes and dreams. They can achieve success. They can achieve ownership of a company if that's what they desire. Not by asking for it, not by lobbying for it and selling themselves, but by getting out there and working hard every day to be the best.
Absolutely. I mean, anything's possible. You just got to put a PPS together and you can make it happen.
Brian, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for round two.
We'll get you back for round three.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.